They not only have to help you to process the trauma, but they have to help you to build up your self-esteem, help you to deal with shame as well. And by doing that, it then enables you, when you go and look at those traumatic memories and emotions, be able to be more capable of dealing with them. Hi, so I'm going to read an excerpt from my diary. If I'm looking down, it's just because I've got my diary and I'm reading from it. 24th of March 2023. You're so stupid. You're so lazy. They don't believe you. They're going to retaliate. You should have done more. They're getting fed up with you. They're going to leave you. I don't feel heard. I feel anger. What is EMDR? EMDR stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. EMDR is an integrative psychotherapy that is sensory, cognitive, emotional, and somatic in nature. How does EMDR work? Imagine your brain is an island and it's surrounded by the sea. C is trauma, external events, situations that happen that you don't have control over. It's just there, it's unpredictable. Eventually, the sea starts to erode the island in half. You have a person on either side of the island. Now, because the erosion has happened in the middle of the island, this separates the two people. They are unable to communicate with one another. They then can't problem solve, and they can't have a healthy way of communicating. Imagine EMDR as a builder. So the builder comes, he sees the problem between the two islands. He starts brick by brick building a bridge between the two islands so that the people on either side of the island can communicate with one another. Once the bridge has been built, the people are then able to communicate without the assistance of the builder. So he can leave and go and build somewhere else. That's the basics of how EMDR works. My experience with EMDR therapy was a really good experience. It helped me to be able to emotionally regulate and also to process my memories that I didn't know were having an effect on me emotionally because I couldn't remember them. She was actually the one that realized I had c-PTSD because my trauma wasn't just the event that had happened to me. It was all of the events that happened before that I didn't classify as traumatic. I thought they were just normal, but apparently they were not normal experiences. They were trauma. But because I'd grown up in that environment and that had just been my life, I normalized it because that was the only way I could survive. She helped me to unpack that and then used EMDR to help me to look at the emotions that I was feeling around a current situation that was happening and to track it back to an original event that happened. Then we were able to do EMDR on that situation. And when we did EMDR, it helped me to process the emotions around that situation and process the memory and bank it in my subconscious mind. That then had a knock-on effect on all the memories that were associated with that one throughout the years. So the impact of those memories lessened as well. Sometimes she would do it where we would actually go to the specific situation. She would then tell me, okay, picture the situation in your mind. What did it look like? What did it smell like? What did it taste like? What did you hear? Just remember as much as you can about the situation. She would walk me through and help me to guide the emotions towards my logical brain to help me to process that memory. And so the nice thing about EMDR is not only does the therapist help you through this process of processing emotions that are stuck in your body, to remember the memory that's attached to that, and to then process and then put it into your subconscious mind, so you're not as affected. You remember that was a sad or scary situation, but you don't have the feelings associated with that situation because those have all been processed. And as she sort of taught my brain to do that, my brain started to do that more and more itself, which I thought was really interesting. It enabled me to have a tool that I could use in my day-to-day life when I got triggered, but didn't necessarily know why I'd been triggered or what a memory it was attached to. I just feel the emotions of being hypervigilant and triggered. I would start to do the technique on myself. I would start to click my finger, tap my fingers, or to create that process to help myself to then be able to regulate those emotions so that my brain could then process those emotions, and it affected me less as a result. Over time, my triggering lessened because of the process that she was using on me, but not only because she was using it on me, but I was applying it to myself as well. I just processed the emotions in the moment to calm them down enough so that I could cope with the situation. When I next went to my therapy session, we could then explore what had been triggered there. And then we could go back into my memories, find the memory that was associated with that trigger, and then process that memory. And then because I was being triggered less, I was then able to engage more in things like self-help strategies and CBT and all of those other things that can be really helpful, but sometimes the trauma kind of gets in the way. EMDR for me, this is my personal experience, it allowed me to be able to have more control over what was going on with me. It allowed me to be able to engage in things that I should be engaging in that I just wasn't able to engage in, and I couldn't understand why. Logically, I understood what people were telling me to do. Meditation's good for you, I know that. So I looked at the research. Logically, I knew that that was good for me. But because of my trauma, I just could not face meditation, because that would mean facing all of that trauma, and it would be overwhelming and I wouldn't be able to cope with it. And so I needed the guidance of the EMDR therapy and a trauma-informed therapist to run me through that EMDR. Because she was so skilled, I was then able to get to a point where I was emotionally regulated enough that I could then start to do all the things that I knew were good for me to do. It made me better able to help myself. For me, EMDR was exceptionally effective. Not all therapies work for everyone, but when it does, the effects are just life-changing. So it's worthwhile trying it. That's my personal opinion. Whether you decide to do EMDR or not, please obviously consult a professional about that. That's basically how I approached it. I can't keep suffering the way I'm suffering, and everything else I've tried hasn't worked very well. I tried CBT before and I was desperate. There were moments where there was certain traumas which I did not want to speak about. So what we did was we then approached the emotions, and she said, start to think about that situation. What emotions are coming up for you? And you don't have to tell me what happened. You don't have to share that with me. We'll just process the emotions. It's not going to be as effective as when I tell her the memory and I tell her the details, because then she's able to incorporate that more easily into my therapy sessions. But it's still effective being able to do it without knowing all of those details. She just asked me what sort of emotions come up when I start to think about that situation, and then we process the emotions using EMDR and cognitive behavioral therapy as well. And part work, and using the combination of all of these treatments, we were then able to have more open and honest conversations about things that have happened to me. I'm not trapped in those memories, able to go, that shitty thing happened to me and it sucked, but I'm not going to let it affect me anymore emotionally. I'm going to move on with my life. And I'm able to do that because I've processed those emotions. So they no longer have control over me. I have more control over myself. That's what EMDR therapy did for me. If I hadn't had EMDR, I wouldn't have been able to bridge that gap. What does the science say? With regards to the efficacy of EMDR with CPTSD, there aren't very many studies. Most of the studies that I was able to find were to do with PTSD and EMDR. The assumption is that because CPTSD and PTSD have a lot of the same signs and symptoms, that EMDR will be effective on CPTSD as well. However, there isn't a huge amount of evidence to back this up. A lot of the studies that mention CPTSD usually have 1 or 2 people in them, 20 or 30, so very small studies. So we really do need much broader study with regards to CPTSD. What I found with regards to the research was that there are 4 key areas. So you have symptom reduction. So the stats say between 77 to 90% of people with PTSD have seen a significant decrease in their PTSD signs and symptoms after having received EMDR alongside trauma-based CBT. This helps to reduce the trauma-related symptoms, and it also helps with emotional regulation. I had no way of regulating my emotions because of what had happened to me. I needed something that could help me to gain enough control over my emotions so that I could actually start to process them. Treatment duration, longer treatment because it's complex trauma, it's ongoing trauma that has happened throughout your life. And most of the studies have shown that with PTSD, around 6 to 12 weeks of treatment seem to be sufficient to significantly reduce their signs and symptoms to a point where they would not be diagnosable with PTSD. Again, this was obviously in conjunction with other therapies. EMDR just acting as that bridge between the therapy and the trauma. Amounts of sessions for CPTSD are 20 sessions, maybe more depending on the situation. For me, mine were more than 20 sessions. And a phase-based approach. What they mean by that is the impact that CPTSD has had on the person, their self-esteem and feelings of shame, all of those things, has had a massive impact. So there's a lot to unpack there. And that also needs really carefully unravel those layers. Because if you just try and open everything up, then it's just going to explode and it's going to have a negative impact on the person and they're not going to want to do therapy anymore. But you're delicately opening and peeling away these layers so that you can get to the core of the trauma so that they can then deal with that with you. So it's very important, firstly, to have resources available. You need physical resources that you can use to help regulate yourself, but you also need emotional and logical resources as well. They not only have to help you to process the trauma, but they have to help you to build up your self-esteem, help you to deal with shame as well. And by doing that, it then enables you, when you go and look at those traumatic memories and emotions, be able to be more capable of dealing with them. I like to explain it like Pandora's box. It's a box that contains hell, and if you open it up, you'll release hell on the earth, and there's no way of closing it. I'd spent all those years just shoving those emotions into the box, and a deep dark part inside of me, not dealing with them because they were too overwhelming for me to deal with, or I was unable to deal with them because of my circumstance. I got to breaking point and opened up Pandora's box, and no matter how much I tried to shove the things back in there to try and not deal with them, I couldn't do anything because they just kept coming out. Because it's Pandora's box. You can't close it once you open it. It's taken me a long time to deal with Pandora's box, and there's still stuff coming out, but I'm better able to deal with it, and I'm also prepared for it. I know that there are still things in there that need to come out, and I know that will take time, but I have the resources to deal with it. And that's important when you have something like complex PTSD. So the phase-based approach, I'm peeling that onion layer by layer, making sure that you have resources available to you so that when those layers are peeled, you can handle it. Research findings. Current research have been very positive with regards to EMDR. Most research studies have found it to be an effective process when dealing with PTSD. Again, very little study has actually been done on c-PTSD, so we don't actually really know whether that equates in the same way with c-PTSD as it does with PTSD. The assumption is because a person with c-PTSD has the PTSD signs and symptoms, that EMDR can help to reduce the symptoms in the c-PTSD, therefore making them better able to then manage. But again, there needs to be a lot more study with regards to that, so watch this space. It'll be interesting to find that out. There have been comparative studies, EMDR and other therapies. Most of the time, EMDR has been proven to be effective when used with appropriate other therapies and medication. A lot of the research agrees that with c-PTSD, it needs to be a really tailored approach when doing treatments like EMDR or any other treatment for that fact. Because it's a complex disorder, it needs a really tailored approach to the individual. EMDR is just a resource that can help in that. It's an effective resource, but it does need to be used in conjunction with other things. It's not on its own going to solve the complex trauma. They need other things. They need healthy diet, you need sleep, you need friends, family support networks, you need psychoeducation to learn about your disorder and be able to better understand what's happening to you so that you can then manage it. They've also said that they need to have a focus on their attachments when tailoring approaches to them, because those attachments, the relationships that we have to people in our lives who have traumatized us, can be a barrier towards the treatment being effective on us. Considerations and challenges. There is very little research out there specifically about c-PTSD with regards to EMDR and the effectiveness of it. World Health Organization and the NHS have accepted CPTSD as a diagnosable disorder. Unfortunately, the DSM-5 does not acknowledge CPTSD as a diagnosis, but it does acknowledge PTSD. That is still a barrier that is being faced, and so people who have CPTSD aren't getting access to the right type of EMDR, which then makes it less effective on them. And make sure that you do have a trauma-informed therapist who does EMDR on you, because it's something that should not be done by somebody who has very little or no experience with trauma. It needs to be somebody who really understands trauma, because they know how to use it with the delicacy that it needs to be used to treat CPTSD. In conclusion, for everyone, the efficacy is different. It's important to understand that. We're all individual, and for some people it will work, and for some people it won't work at all. But isn't it worth trying something that potentially could really change your life? The newer version of EMDR does not always require the person to talk about the details of the trauma. They can use other ways, so emotions for instance, to work with in order to help you to process that memory. In my next therapy session, I did feel comfortable enough to be able to talk about that traumatic situation. I feel like I wouldn't have been able to do that if we hadn't done EMDR the previous session on those emotions. And then because I was able to talk about it, I was then able to process it even more. Again, you don't have to talk about the details with your therapist. There are ways that they can do EMDR on you without finding out all the details, because sometimes talking about all the details can be traumatic in itself. This is why I think that EMDR is something that really is very important in CPTSD and the treatment of it. Because of its efficacy in dealing with the signs and symptoms of PTSD, EMDR has been recommended to be used for physical conditions as well. There's still a lot of research that needs to be done into CPTSD, and so hopefully in the future we will know more. I'm really excited actually to see what happens, so watch this space. I hope that this episode was helpful, and thank you to the person who requested this episode. Please like or subscribe or click the bell notification, and that will notify you when another episode is available. So if you do want to support me in this process and make me able to do more videos, then please do sign on to Patreon. Look below. Hope you've enjoyed the episode. Bye now.